Okay, Professor Guadaloupe, welcome back to the Windward Islands. I remember the last time you were here was 99, I believe it was.
Yes, it was 99. I just finished my MA degree in development studies and anthropology. Now 10 years back, I am working at the Radboud University in Nijmegen, and I'm a research fellow, postdoctoral research fellow at the Amsterdam School for Social Scientific Research, which is part of the University of Amsterdam. So I have a dual function at the University of Nijmegen and the University of Amsterdam. And I'm here actually to do a large-scale research to understand how these islands are handling their best status.
Oh, okay. So you're quite busy then?
I'm quite busy. I was on Aruba, I was on Curacao. At Curacao I gave a talk with the UNA. Then I went to St. Martin, Saba, and now St. Eustatius. Yeah.
Let us get an idea of what your studies entail. Anthropology, yes. Explain anthropology.
Anthropology Anthropology is actually the study of humankind. So it's actually a study to understand ourselves. One part of it seeks to understand human beings in their evolution. Another part says if you want to understand human beings, you have to understand them in their locations.
That means behavior.
Yes, exactly. The behavior of human beings, the culture they create, and the ways in which they interact with the problems that they have to face.
Okay. 10 years later, you said now that you are a professor at the university. Did they send you here, or is this your own initiative?
No, they sent me here. Okay. Yeah, so it's a large-scale research to understand how the best status is happening, but also to understand how these countries are part of Europe, because they are part of the Dutch kingdom.
Right.
And if we want to integrate the Dutch kingdom in such a way in which all parties will feel themselves comfortable and will engage in a more fruitful discussion and conversation with each other for mutual benefit, then it's best to understand each other's cultural sensitivities.
Right. So where do you start on a study like this?
Where do I start? Well, what I did coming to the Antilles was say one place where people will begin to really start to understand each other is in the schools. Because if teachers do their work well, then the teachers will teach all the students to understand themselves as stations, but also parts of the Dutch Antilles.
But wait, let me stop you there. I'm glad you brought that up, because in the schools in the Netherlands Antilles, I remember well when I was going to school, it must have changed a lot since then.
Yeah.
But very little was taught about our heroes, our people, our politicians, whatever have you, in our culture. Very little was taught. We were taught about Jan Schaats op het ijs and whatever, that Aap klimt boom and that kind of stuff. Is that changing?
I think that what you're seeing is that some people are trying to change that. I think we still have a long way to go as far as that is concerned. But I don't think it's a question of replacing one for the other. I think it's complementing the two.
Okay.
So I think people should learn a bit more about Antillean history, but also about station history. But they should also learn to see that history in relation to Dutch history. And people in the Netherlands, where I teach, I try to teach them at the university that to understand the Netherlands, you have to understand it as part of the Dutch kingdom. So you now have to learn to understand the Dutch Antilles and Aruba.
Right.
So I think it's mutually we have to now learn about each other and learn about ourselves as well.
Is your study geared more towards politics, perhaps?
Part of it is politics, but part of it is also the everyday life of human beings, the everyday life of people. So part of it is to understand the political evolution of the Dutch kingdom, to say, well, it started out with colonialism and slavery, then we went to the abolition period, and then we went through a period in which the statute was signed, and now we are entering a new period again in which you see another form of integration of this Dutch kingdom. In that new form, we will have to undo ourselves of remnants of the past which are hampering all of us, and learn to see each other as citizens. I think that is important.
Right. Are you visiting all those phases, the evolution of the Netherlands Antilles, like you said, slavery, colonialism, all of that? Are you visiting them one by one?
I am visiting all of them one by one, but I see that what is important is to understand how people understood them.
Okay.
That is very important. So some people will say we still are facing the remnants of slavery. Some people will say it's best to interpret slavery differently. I think if some of the things that we hold and cherish dearly, like the freedom of expression, I think that you can't understand the freedom of expression if you don't understand its linkage to slavery. For a human being to understand themselves as being free and to cherish freedom, you had to have had slavery. So slavery is an integral part of that freedom of expression. It's an integral part of people understanding themselves as individuals. For that is important, to treat a person as an individual.
Correct.
Now, that is linked to what colonialism did with the indentured laborers coming out of Asia, China, and India, but also the slavocratic experience in the Caribbean. So I think to understand those values that we cherish a lot, those liberal values, you have to understand the role of colonialism. You can't get stuck in colonialism, but you have to take it on board and say, okay, so how are we going to now build a better kingdom? That to me is
Right.
of consequence.
Do you believe that colonialism still exists in the Netherlands Antilles? I'll stick to the Netherlands Antilles,
Netherlands
not the Caribbean.
Antilles.
Yeah.
I believe actually that the metaphor of colonialism many a times blinds us to the current reality. If we use a new metaphor, then we will be able to see much more.
What would that be, that new metaphor?
I think the new metaphor would actually be, as I call it, multicultural conviviality. I think that all places are now faced with the fact that they have to deal with the multiculture, with the fact that you have a multi-ethnicity of people around you, carrying various histories, and those histories now have to form or try to meet each other and form something new, a new project as such. So whilst many of us in the Antilles can say they have a direct linkage to Dutch colonialism, there are many of us who come from Grenadian, Guyanese, Dominican, Colombian descent that have various other histories.
Right.
And those histories have to meet now, and we have to create a new common project, and I think that project is solely about the emancipation of human beings.
Right. Is that making it more difficult that you have a multicultural, especially in St. Martin? There are many cultures over there.
Yeah.
Here in Station, not too bad yet.
Yeah.
But do you think that's making it more difficult? And that you have to deal with all these people with their cultures that they bring with them?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
their behavior, as a matter of fact.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You have to accommodate to one another. I wrote a book, just came out with the University of California Press, called Chanting Down the New Jerusalem. It's about St. Martin and Saint Martin, so the French and the Dutch side. I would like to think that diversity is a strength. If utilized well, diversity is your strength.
Right.
That means that you actually can find various answers to problems. That's what diversity allows you to do. That if you have a problem, you will say, well, okay, so how do you do it there? And how do you do it there? And then you look at the best practices and you use those best practices.
How long do you think we'll take before we can reach some common ground with all the cultures that we have in the Netherlands Antilles, in particular Windward Islands?
I think that what you have seen in the Windward Islands is that we have at least come to get accustomed to one another. No one looks up anymore when they hear Spanish. No one looks up when they hear Creole or English or Dutch. That is already something of a strength. When I traveled through Shanghai, I was in Shanghai giving some talks, China, I realized the difference between the Windward Islands and Shanghai. In Shanghai, people look up when they see me. They look up when they hear English or a different language. Here in the Antilles, no one looks up when they see someone who looks Chinese, phenotypically Chinese, or they hear Chinese, they just find it a normal thing.
Right.
So that getting accustomed to difference is something of our strength. Now, accommodating that difference in making it work for us is something we have to put more emphasis in.
Right. But that is also because, like you said, in Shanghai, they look up to you.
Yeah.
Very few blacks over there, number
Exactly.
one. Very little English spoken over there, number two.
Yes.
But they are keeping their culture more than we are. Would you say that's true?
I would say that what they're doing, because we have to understand ourselves in relation to them, we are different than them.
Definitely.
We actually were born of the mixture of cultures.
Yes, correct.
And we were born of taking on the best of the various cultures. If you want to understand, for instance, something as basic as the Industrial Revolution, then you can't understand the Industrial Revolution only by looking at England. You have to look at the Caribbean, because it was here during those plantation era when you had the sugar. The sugar was a time in which task time began to matter. So which means that the time of the lago, of the shell, of the sugar was actually teaching people you wake up at a particular moment in time and you work 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
Where was that first implemented? It was implemented first in the Caribbean. That is basic and important to have an industrial revolution. So the Caribbean is Western, it has Eastern elements, it has African elements, it is a combination of all these elements into something new. So I think, of course, we are keeping, and we should keep the best of it, but we should